There are three sections to this video. The first one is just starting off your section. This can be the most intimidating part of thread painting, I find. So what you're going to want to do is just start off at the boundary of your section and do straight stitches heading in the direction you want the needle painting to go. You're going to want to make your stitches very varied in length at this stage. It's going to feel quite weird because some stitches are going to be 3 times the length of others, but it's really important to get that staggered effect at this stage because that's really going to help with the overall look of the piece when you carry on. So for this piece, you can see that I've marked out the sections. If you saw yesterday's post, you'll know that this red section that I'm currently filling is the darkest tone. Now once I've started off this section, I'm then going to blend in the middle tone and then the pale tone, and I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. So as you can see, the length of my stitches is quite varied, though obviously you do want to make sure at this stage that you have filled the entire boundary of where you started. So you want to make sure that there aren't any gaps, because obviously you don't want the stitching to look thin at any point. You don't want the fabric to show through. But at the same time, be careful because you don't want to be stitching over the same piece of fabric, because then the stitching will get really quite heavy and quite difficult to work with. If you can see, when I'm coming up through the stitching that I've already done, what I'm trying to do is come up between the previous stitches rather than splitting the thread. That just helps to give the piece a smoother look. If you split the thread, it can create a sort of hole in the overall stitching, whereas if you come up between the threads, then they tend to close around where you've come up and it looks a lot smoother. So it's quite hard to see, but I have actually changed colour here. This is the middle tone that I'm using for this piece, so it's quite close to the tone that I've already used, which is why you might find it hard to see. But it's really important that you don't miss out this step because it is going to make the transition between the dark tone and the pale tone much smoother. That's really what the mid-tone is doing for this piece. It's creating a gradient so that, for instance, you're not going straight from black to white, to take a crude example. You're going black to grey and then to white, and that just makes it a lot smoother to look at. And it makes it less noticeable because obviously what you want isn't to have blocks of colour in your piece. You want them to transition into one another, and you don't necessarily want to see that. One of the things that helps that is that the stitching, the length of the stitches is very varied. So as you can see, the edge of my stitching is staggered and is very sort of jaggedy, and that really helps because it means that some of the stitches are going much deeper into the previous stitching colour than others, and some are going to head further into the paler tone as well, and that again makes the transition a lot smoother. You may even find that some of the stitches, when you add the pale tone, go through the stitching for the dark tone, but so long as you have got the middle tone in there, that will just make the transition very smooth. So just starting to add the pale thread now. And this one is a bit more noticeable because the mid-tone that I chose was closer to the dark tone than it was to the pale tone. But that's not a problem, so long as you've done the previous steps correctly, then it should still create a nice smooth transition. Also, the shape of the darker tone of the section that I've worked makes blending on this piece a little bit more difficult because of the direction of the thread is curving with the section. It would be easier to blend if the direction of thread is going more perpendicular to the section that I was stitching, but you work with what you've got, and that's where the colours go on the piece. And the direction of thread is also very important when needle painting or thread painting. You want to make sure that you are following the direction of the animal's fur or skin or whatever it is that you are stitching, or the direction of the petal if you're doing flowers or something like that, because if you get the direction right, then the light when it hits the thread will also flow and it will create a lovely 3D effect if you get that correct. So again, when I get to the edge of this piece, because I want a staggered jaggedy edge because ducklings are fluffy, I'm just making sure that I am leaving a sort of raw edge of my thread painting as it would normally look when you are halfway through a piece. If you wanted to have a more definite boundary to the edge of your thread painting, then all you would do is carry on exactly as normal, and when you get to the edge you would just stop at the same point with each stitch, rather like you do in silk stitch, and that would create a definite boundary for you, a bit like the reverse of when you started off the section at the beginning of the video. Thread painting can be quite intimidating, but I hope that this has explained it a little bit more for you. I don't pretend to be an expert in any way. There are people that are much better at this than I am, but I hope that that has explained some of the pitfalls and some of the things that it helps me to remember when I'm doing thread painting. Various stitches. Use mid-tones to blend between the colours. Pick colours well before you start, that always helps. Make sure the direction of your thread is right, and you should be onto a winner.